today's episode, I am so happy to welcome back Dr. Emily King, where she shares with us her expertise on school-related anxiety and how this anxiety shows up behaviorally for our kids who live with brain-based differences and vulnerable nervous systems. She shares with us some obvious ways and then some not so obvious ways that this anxiety can present in this specific setting. We also touch on parental anxiety, which is a common and very understandable byproduct of parenting kids who are struggling in school. So with that said, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dr. Emily King. Dr. Emily King, I am so excited to have you back on the podcast. Thanks for coming back on so we could hear all about your book.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about the book finally.
I am sure you are. It's such an accomplishment, and I was so happy to be able to read pieces of it. I'm not through the whole thing, but what I've read so far, I absolutely love, and I know it's going to be such a gift to so many parents and educators. So I'm happy to have you on so more people can know about it.
Well, thank you. I would
Yeah.
love for more people to know.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. We'll do our part in spreading the word. So I would love to focus in on a very specific topic that you covered in your book, and it's specifically chapter 8 for those folks who, when they get their copy, they can be mindful of that. And it's on this topic of anxiety, which is a huge, huge deal for so many of our kids in terms of their behavioral symptoms. But what I really appreciate in that chapter is that you don't focus just on the kids, you focus on the parent experience pretty heavily, which is
hmm
what I am always trying to do in this episode, is not just have it be just about our kids and the ways they struggle, the way we need to support them, but what's happening with the parent too. So that
Right.
was what I thought we would talk about, and I know it's going to really resonate with folks listening in.
Yeah, I would love to. This was probably one of my favorite chapters to write. I say that about multiple chapters though, just because I've lived this experience as a parent and I've sat
Yeah.
with so many families who have lived this experience of not being at school and getting a call from school. And even if you're not getting a call, anticipating a call, wondering what's
Yes.
happening. There's a lot of anxiety on our side as parents that
Yes.
is important to consider as a part of the picture as
Totally.
well because it's hard. It's really hard stepping away, but then knowing you want to you want them to have a good day. And then
Yes.
it's that feeling of of course, no news is good news, but the feeling of just waiting for the other shoe to drop. If your child
Yes.
is making progress at all, you like don't quite believe it,
Yes.
because you're so used to crisis mode or, anxiety showing up in a way that's not conducive to a learning environment.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I think it's one of the main contributors to parents feeling very, very isolated because your experience reflects mine personally. I absolutely know what that feels like. And then also with the parents that I've worked with. In fact, you have an example, like this chapter starts out with meeting with a parent and having them called away during your session with them because the school
hmm
has called, and just you can you can tell that parent the worry, like the pit, the worried pit in their stomach that that brings. And I think we've all been there, and in my professional role, I have too. So I would love to talk a little bit about anxiety, how it shows up in the school system, since your book is specific, gets very specific into learning and how it's connected to learning. And you talk about, there's two things that I loved that you said. You said, through the lens of neurodiversity, the child is not the problem. And you also talked about how special education in particular is rooted in the medical model, which I had never thought about before, but I reflect on it for a moment and I'm like, oh yeah, duh. That makes sense. So I'd love for you to talk about those because I feel like they're really connected too. So wherever you want to begin with those two pieces, I'd love for you to
Yeah,
share.
I think for any parent or educator who knows a neurodivergent child well, let's say it is a very active child or a very sensitive child, you get to know really quickly the patterns you're anticipating of the systems around them and what might be triggers. You know, we have gut feelings as parents. Sometimes teachers will know kids so well that they have gut feelings of students of like, oh, that's not going to work for this student. As
Hmm.
parents, we absolutely have those feelings. And all of those are around our lived experience of helping our unique child in whatever way makes them unique navigate a system, whether that's a building or a curriculum or a school day that is truly designed for the masses, right? It's
Yes.
designed for the masses and it needs to be. You know, most of us are in the middle of the bell curve. However, this book is not for the middle of the bell curve. And so there are so many students who especially on the surface, will quote unquote look like they're doing okay, whether that's
Yes.
academically, socially, you know, people pleasing is a good example of anxiety that looks like it's fitting in that perfectionism of I was a very high achieving perfectionistic student myself,
Yeah.
and I talk about that in gosh, I can't remember which chapter, but there's a chapter where I describe my school experience. I believe it's the testing chapter because I had a lot of anxiety towards testing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about the context of the child is not broken, nothing
Yeah,
is wrong with them, right?
that's right.
But when we put them in a system that is misaligned with either
Yes.
how they learn or what their needs are,
Yes.
we get conflict, we get
Yes.
problems. And so we start there, and then that, of course, helps us, you know, make that connection to the medical model versus the developmental model. You know, when I talk about this, I think multiple times in the book when it comes up, but our special education system is really designed to mirror our medical system, which is you diagnose a problem and then you treat the problem.
Yes.
And that works. The most linear way that that works is usually with like a reading disability. Like we've
Yeah.
diagnosed that there is a reading disability and we have, you know, interventions that are researched that are usually really clear to improve progress with helping kids learn to read, that
Yeah.
learn to read in a different way. You know, sometimes the ADHD medication route will follow a little bit more of a linear model. Um, but everything else, I mean, pretty much everything else is
Yes.
complex, is not a straight line at all. And trust me, reading intervention and medication are definitely not a straight line either. So when you think about the moving target of a child's development, it's not a broken arm. We can have
Yes.
a an intervention for.
Yes.
Um, every single child's learning brain approach to anything is going to be different and it's fluid. You know, they're different
Yes.
ages. Did they sleep the night before? Are
Yes.
they not feeling well? Are they in sensory overwhelm? They're all of these variables to helping ready kids to learn. And so we have to first understand that context
Yes.
of, and that's why in the beginning of the book, I go through the sensory experience of the school building, the sensory
Mm.
experience of what a classroom might feel like,
Yes.
and choosing a school that's as if you have the choice to choose your child's school or to even choose when your child enters school, um, thinking about the alignment of what they need developmentally and what is offered in your area. And so just
Yeah.
that alignment is what I hope parents and teachers walk away from thinking, okay, we have these systems of education and it's, you know, obviously a wonderful thing that we have education systems. However, I do feel like we're kind of, you know, we're kind of 100 years after we first started making school compulsory for everyone. It's
Yeah.
time for, and we're about 50 years after special education became a law. And
Mm.
so it feels like these kids and this movement of neurodiversity is like knocking on the door of like, okay, we
Yes.
can do better. We can do a
Yes.
little bit better. Let's take this a little farther and understand that the pacing matters, the sensory environment matters, the connections matter, and all of
Yes.
that is a part of our kids' learning.
Yeah, yeah, I love that because what you're talking about is all the things that matter in terms of the root cause of the behavior, but you're also touching on how we see the behavior and understand that is
Hmm.
also important. And you gave a great example of anxiety being the behavior reflecting that can be people pleasing, right?
Hmm.
And not many people make that connection. I'm wondering if there are other reflections of anxiety that you see are misunderstood as something else.
Hmm. When I present to educators and sometimes to parents, I'll point this out as well. I call this anxiety that's hard to miss and
Yeah.
anxiety that's easy to miss.
Yes, I love
So the
that.
hard to miss stuff, is the aggression,
Yeah.
whether that's physical aggression, verbal arguing, irritability, breaking pencils, ripping paper. You're not going to miss it. Not getting out of the car in the morning. These are
Yes.
all big behaviors that disrupt routines, that are sometimes unsafe, but usually they are rooted deeply in some form of anxiety, either about the transition or about being in the space. Sometimes the anxiety is about leaving the home and leaving the primary caregiver. Sometimes the anxiety is about going towards something that doesn't feel aligned for a
Yeah.
child. So to use the example of resistance to school, of getting out of the car in the morning or separating from a parent, we really have to figure out which is it. Like, does this
Yes.
child separate
Yes.
in other environments
That's
that are
right.
not related to school, or does this child never separate?
That's
And that
right.
can give us some clues as to what is causing the anxiety for a child.
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
we have the easy to miss anxieties, which is the people pleasing, the perfectionism, the high achieving, wound up tight child.
Yeah.
These are often gifted learners. They can often be twice exceptional learners, which is it makes kids even more anxious because they have high expectations based on their intelligence, but then they're noticing either a learning disability or ADHD or autism that is impacting their socialization or their achievement in some way.
Yes.
And so those are usually behaviors that will come out secondary or not at the time, exactly at the time that the anxiety is happening. For instance, a child who can hold it together at school because
Yep.
they are wound up tight and they're pleasing and they're doing everything they need to do because they're anxious to make a mistake. They're
Yes.
anxious to get called out. They're anxious to get in trouble. So they fall apart at about
Yes.
3:30 or 4 in the
Yep.
afternoon when they hit their safe place.
Yep.
And this is a pattern we need to pay attention to because I've worked with many, many schools that are like, well, if it's not happening at school, it's not a school
That's
problem. And I've
right.
worked with many parents who will say, if it's not happening at home, it's not a school problem. So, like,
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
to actually remember the whole child's day
That's
and
right.
that this is a whole kid with a whole day's worth of energy. And if energy is higher at school or at home, or if the mood is better, one or the other places,
Yes.
usually that anxiety that's easy to miss, it has something usually to do with like times where there's inconsistencies in
Hmm.
behavior.
Okay.
A child who's struggling with, aggression and irritability and just big behaviors, we usually do see that across settings.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
because it's more intense, it's less within the control of the child.
Yeah.
That under the radar kind of behavior, kids can kind of hold it together in certain settings and then let it loose
Yeah.
when they're exhausted.
Great. Oh, that'll be so helpful. Parents are coming to mind as you name all of those different ways that it presents. And what it brings to mind is I know that in that chapter you have the way that it presents for different diagnoses. And you talk a lot
Hmm.
about autism in girls versus boys
Hmm.
too, which I know we don't have time to get into all of those specifics today because there's other things I want to make sure we talk about. But I just wanted to mention that for
Yeah.
parents because there are differences that are
Hmm.
important to recognize. Um, you talked about the art of setting limits, and it was in this chapter on anxiety. So I
Hmm.
would love for you to talk about that art because I think it's a
Hmm.
great way to describe it. I know that many parents are like, I can't set limits, like my child won't tolerate them, and that feels
Hmm.
very powerless. I know there's a lot of schools that are listening, teachers saying, I try to set limits. Like I set very clear and you know, what the word that's coming to mind, and I don't want this to sound judgmental, but like very rigid
Hmm.
limits.
Consistent. Hmm.
Yeah, consistent, that's a good word. um, and that's not working. So
Hmm.
how the art of setting limits, like how do you define that? How do you talk about that? And what is its connection to anxiety?
Yeah, so I think about setting limits as an art more related to the parent's emotional state than the child's emotional state.
Hmm.
Because as a parent, we all know that if we're tired at the end of the day, we are not going to be as consistent as we would be on a Saturday morning when we've had a family meeting and we're ready to set boundaries about screen time or whatever the thing is, you know.
Right, right.
And so we have to have gas in the tank or emotional stamina to be consistent. And so I want parents to hear me when I say, like, this is not a perfect roll out the plan. I hear so many parents say, oh, I couldn't stick with it. And I always want to say, okay, let's talk about what you could stick with, what made it hard to stick with
Yes.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's pick and choose what's doable. And that's the art. And some days you ebb and flow on, I don't have the stamina to follow through with this, but I want to make sure my kid knows. So a good example of this would be let's say you're exhausted as a parent and you are really wanting to stick with we'll just use screen time because everyone can relate to that, to a screen time limit, but it would feel really, really nice to lie down and maybe have, 30 extra minutes to yourself. You can say to your child, hey, today's a little different. I am so tired. I'm going to give you some bonus screen time so that we can both have some downtime before I start making dinner. And of course, your kid will
Yeah.
be flexible and cool with it. What's important there is though that you communicated that today is different. This is
Yeah.
not a new normal. This is not you trying to push my buttons and get away with something. This is today's circumstances are different,
Yes.
and I need you to be part of my team here. And
Yes.
especially for single parents out there, and letting them know that this is a change in setting a limit because of these circumstances. And then the
Yes.
opposite can be true too. Let's say your child is sick or tired, or there's something going on with maybe medication that's impacting their behavior and they're more reactive, they're more anxious. So I get this a lot when I talk to parents of I can't set a limit. Like you said, my child will be reactive.
Yeah.
And there are certain situations that are more specific and need more support than my book can provide. But
Yeah.
working one-on-one with a provider, if you feel like your child can't be parented, and
Yeah.
what I mean by that is like if you feel like you can't say no, if you
Yeah.
feel like um, you can't follow through without your child becoming physically
That's right.
aggressive
Yep.
or verbally mean to you
Yep.
or a family member, that child needs a higher level of support. We need to be talking to a, mental health provider, a pediatrician to figure out what level of support that child needs. You're not doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
That just means that your child needs more support to handle some parenting limits. So when I say limits, I really mean boundaries. And so
Yes.
for some kids that are really, really sensitive to parents saying no
Mm-hmm.
to any type of limit,
Mm-hmm.
we start with safety. I will always make you wear your seatbelt. I
Yeah.
will always, run after you if you try to run into the street.
Yeah.
Those are boundaries. And so when
Yeah.
I help parents understand that we actually do have these universal boundaries of safety in our neighborhoods and in our cars,
Yes.
maybe at a beach or when you're out in nature, that when you're around an animal you don't know, like there are these universal safety boundaries that even if your child erupts when you say, no, I can't buy you that, or you have to wait for me to be available, things that are um, not unsafe, right? They they're going to be fine,
Yeah.
except your child may not be able to handle that.
Right.
So we have to start somewhere, and usually with kids who are highly reactive, we can start with the non-negotiables of safety.
Yes.
And then,
Yes.
of course, the next layer of that is health. So, like
Yes.
setting limits with, you know, eating, brushing teeth, any type of hygiene and sleep. So, all of those health things, you have to get really creative sometimes because there's so much about possibly autism or ADHD that impacts a lot of those things from
That's right.
sensory issues, sleep issues, just, routines that can get in the way of those, rigidity that can get in the way of those. So those are just some ways to start thinking about boundaries and limits in layers and not
Yes.
just all or nothing.
Yeah.
It's not all or nothing. There's this art to how the when we support kids with different boundaries and also which ones move to the forefront of being
Yes.
important.
Yes. Oh, that will resonate with folks who listen to this podcast regularly because I'm often talking about focusing in on your highest priorities, and
Hmm.
sometimes that's a crushing process for a parent to have to go through because, and I talk about setting it, focusing on health and safety first, but it's really, really hard to feel as a parent like I should be able to hold more expectations than this. And it's like, well, this is just where we're starting, right? This is where
Hmm.
we need to begin. And to also understand that it's a completely understandable pattern that over years of being in chronic frustration with your child,
Hmm.
your limits would have gotten more and more rigid and narrow, like
Hmm.
more controlling because you're worried. You're worried about
Yeah.
it. And so that might be what needs to happen too, is like, okay, let's just to calm things
Hmm.
down here. Let's take a step back and see what
Hmm.
we can let go for now, kind of, that
Hmm.
kind of thing. So,
Yeah, and I've worked with both extremes, families that are not setting any boundaries, and then families that have so many boundaries and rules that a child doesn't feel like they have any autonomy. And
yeah.
so, both really are often rooted in our anxiety as parents of being able to step back and say, okay, why does it make me overwhelmed to give my kid a little bit more freedom? Or why does it make me overwhelmed to think about saying no?
Yes.
And we've got to dig into that. And if you're a parent listening and you feel like, oh gosh, that's totally me, this is why I say to all the moms and dads I work with, like, if you need to talk with a therapist about what
Yes.
that's bringing up for you, that is one of the best things you can do for your kids because we
Yes.
bring baggage from how we were parented to
Right.
this situation, but often we are in the audience I'm talking with, often parenting a child sometimes with fewer skills at the moment than
That's
maybe
right.
we had when we were 12 or
That's right.
8.
Yeah, and so it's like, well, it worked for me. Why doesn't it work for them? Well, let's talk about how your brain works and maybe the different ways that your child's brain works. But that impact of parental anxiety, I wanted to make sure that we spend a moment to talk about that and
Sure.
leading right into it because all of the work that I do is just with parents. I don't work with the kids. I don't work with the family unit as a whole. And you're speaking to why that is really.
Hmm.
It's we begin talking about their kids, their brain that works differently, all of that kind of stuff. But we inevitably get to the parent and what's happening internally for them, the way they were raised, how those deeply held beliefs and values are clashing with who their child is.
Hmm.
So, in that, and it brings up a lot of anxiety, and we have behavioral symptoms that reflect
Yeah.
that anxiety too. Yeah. So, yeah, I would love to hear just a little bit more about what you have seen is able to shift when we're able to help parents reflect on their own experience in these non shaming, very compassionate ways. Like, what sort of bigger shifts then do you see from that work?
Yeah, I mean, I love working with families over time
Yeah.
because it's really rewarding to see the growth in parents. And
Yes.
one of the reasons that I have transitioned over time to see more parents than kids is because the impact is so high. It's more effective sometimes for a
Yeah.
child to be at school or a child to go have their extracurriculars than to come see me and I'm not talking to their parent.
Yeah.
And so I mainly now work with parents during the school day. I still see a few kids I've seen for years and years. But the reason is intentional, is because to see some parents come to me, years ago with that feeling of why can't they, or they should be able to by this age do this thing,
Yes.
and I say it multiple times in the book, but throw chronological time out the
Yes.
window. You are
Yes.
on your child's developmental
That's
time
right.
now. And
That's
we
right.
were all raised in a very achievement focused K-12 experience where like everyone
Yes.
was expected in the 80s and 90s to graduate from high school and go to college. And it was quote unquote kind of weird if you didn't go to college or military right after high school. Like we didn't have gap years. That was
Yes.
unheard of, you know?
Right.
And now I do love post-COVID that we are loosening up our expectations of the when our kids achieve things. So
Yes.
that I think that normalization of everybody learns in a different way, everybody is on their own path, helps parents reframe, okay, maybe my 12-year-old isn't doing this yet. So it's that whole growth mindset, but for
Yes.
parents.
Yes.
Um, and then there's also the parent who is easily overwhelmed, right? Like this is an overwhelming job, and I'm not minimizing it at all. I've lived it.
Yeah.
Because my oldest is now 18, and I feel like I mean we're still on the path, but
Yeah.
I do feel like I've been through seasons of development with him.
Yeah.
When he was very young, he was physically aggressive. He's no longer physically aggressive, but was I
Yeah.
terrified that he would be?
Yes.
That feeling of like, what if he's still doing this when he's taller than I am?
That's
That
right.
panicky feeling.
That's
And
right.
so to watch families over time just redefine how they see their kid and how they know that if they can trust that whatever comes, they will figure it out, that will lower their anxiety. And so meeting with people like us, or, just definitely, doing workshops and reading books and all of those things, but also trusting yourself that if a new problem comes up, you will figure it out. And having like a new version of being
Yes.
okay, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. Yeah, what I hear you talk a lot in that, in just what you shared, is easing into the acceptance too of who our
Yes.
kids
Oh,
are.
yes. Mm-hmm.
That just goes hand in hand with that. How anxious am I today about my
Mm-hmm.
child? And my daughter's 17, and I mean, just to give my own experience of it very quickly. Um, she's just now learning to stay home by herself for 30 minutes at a time. She will never drive. We will enjoy her company probably for a long time. And that's a whole nother end of that spectrum, right? And
Mm-hmm.
understanding that, yeah, with each, I love how you said seasons, like you've
Yeah.
been through many seasons with your son. For each season, it's like, okay, what do they need here? Because the world
Mm-hmm.
around them has changed. So their needs have changed. Let's figure it
Mm-hmm.
out in this context. And I
Yeah.
have the information I need to figure that out. But there's a lot of parents who are like, I don't have that information
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to figure it out on my own. And as I say, read your book,
Well, and I also say
listen to
to
this
parents,
podcast. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. And I also say to parents, and this is what I did, is I took it one school year at a time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if someone said that to me or I just made a decision. I don't have a memory of when I started doing that. Probably was some sort of coping mechanism of like one IEP meeting at a time.
Yeah.
Um, because and it's something it may have come to me because of my work, and I do
Mhm.
see kids grow up, and I do see kids. I did have the lived experience of seeing kids just drastically change from, being in preschool to being 12, 13, 15, so um there was that little glimmer of like, okay, development is going to happen. Is it behind the curve? Absolutely. Do I not know when the next milestone is going to come? I have no idea.
Yeah.
But, my son also, we're not sure if he will drive. He will be with us for a little while. I love you said we're enjoying his company for a while. I love it. We totally are enjoying his company.
Yeah.
He loves that he's been someone that I can share his story with to be a
Same.
part of this book.
Same.
And
Yeah.
and so he gets that. He gets that there are
Yeah.
other families that can benefit from that story.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I knew our personal situations were somewhat in the same realm. I didn't realize how
Yeah,
similar
I
they
didn't
were.
realize that
So,
either.
yeah. All right. I want to end with a quote from the book that I love, and so I just need to put it in here for folks to hear, because it's what we talk about all the time and it's so good. And then I would love to hear just anything else that we haven't covered that you want to make sure folks know, and then, of course, where they can get the book and all of that. So you said the size of the discrepancy between the child's skills and the expectations are often the size of the child's anxiety. So that is just, it is so foundational to
Hmm.
just how we see kids in these situations, and they are not the
Yeah.
problem. So I love it so much.
Yeah.
Love it
Thank
so
you so
much.
much.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to share before we
Yeah,
head
I
out?
if there are any teachers listening, I would love for you to know too. One of my pleasant surprises so far is that even though parents are the audience for this book, I've had several educators tell me that it's shifting their perspective of what parents are coming to the table with. That
Yeah.
this is, the anxiety that they may have, the struggles they may have of not fully understanding meetings and not fully understanding how to
Yeah.
collaborate effectively and communicate, because there are a lot of um, you know, strategic things in the book, lists, scripts, things that email scripts that you can
Yes.
just have to help you communicate with your child's teacher. And I didn't expect educators to
Hmm.
start talking about it, and I have just loved
Yeah.
that so much. So I wanted educators to know that this book is for them too.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And another idea that comes to mind is that parents who are listening, to get your book, to read through it, maybe even highlight the sections that are especially relevant to their child
Hmm.
and gift it to the teacher.
Yes. Yes,
Right? Like, this book
absolutely.
is for you, and the relevant pieces are highlighted.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So, where can they find your book? Where, when, and where, and all of that
Yeah,
good
so
stuff?
it is currently on pre-order. If you're listening to this before August 25th, you can pre-order it anywhere books are sold, especially your local bookstore. You can find out who your local bookstore is at Bookshop. And then for after August 25th, you can then buy it and it will get mailed to you. But there will also be an audio version. I am reading the audio. I'm
Yeah.
recording it next week. I'm very excited about it. So if you are an auditory learner, I wanted to
Yeah.
make it really easy for everyone to either read or listen.
Yeah.
There will be an audio version that will be available also on August 25th.
Oh, great. Okay, so
Hmm.
same time.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, well, we will link to everything that's relevant in the show notes so people can find it there. Thank you so much for coming
Yes.
back and sharing
Thank you
this
so much for having
huge
me.
gift to the world with us. Yeah, I'm so glad that we've connected, and so
Me
glad this
too.
book will be there for parents and teachers.
Me too. Thank you.
Okay, take care.